The floorboards creaked beneath her knees as Evelyn Hart scrubbed blood from the wood, her own blood, from where her father's fist had split her lip that morning. Outside, two men bartered over her like cattle at auction, deciding her fate with handshakes and whiskey. She was 22 years old and had never been kissed with kindness, never been held without cruelty, never known a gentle word. That night, staring at stars through a cracked window, she made a vow that would change everything. She would run or she would die trying. Before we begin this journey across the unforgiving American frontier, I invite you to stay with us until the very end, and please, comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far Evelyn's story has traveled across this world. The Kansas plains stretched endless and indifferent beneath a colorless sky, the kind of sky that promised nothing and delivered less. It was April of 1874, though Evelyn Hart had long since stopped marking the passage of seasons with anything resembling hope. Time moved differently when you were property. She knelt beside the iron stove in the cabin's main room, her fingers raw and reddened from lye soap, scrubbing at stains that had set into the floorboards months ago. The cabin itself was a testament to decay. Warped wood, gaps in the chinking that let winter winds howl through, a roof that leaked in 3 places. Her father, Malcolm Hart, had let everything fall to ruin, including himself. The whiskey bottle sat on the table like a third occupant of the room, nearly empty, catching the thin afternoon light. Malcolm slouched in his chair, his face a roadmap of broken capillaries and poor decisions, his eyes rheumy and unfocused. He'd been handsome once, or so her mother had claimed before the fever took her when Evelyn was 9. Now he was just another broken man in a territory full of them, drowning his failures one bottle at a time. "Girl," he said, his voice thick and slurred. "Stop that damn scrubbing. We got company coming." Evelyn's hands stilled on the brush. Company was never good. Company meant creditors or men Malcolm owed money to, or worse, men Malcolm had made promises to. She'd learned to read the particular tension in her father's shoulders that preceded disaster, and she recognized it now. "Who's coming?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Thornton, from town." Malcolm reached for the bottle, found it empty, and cursed. "You'll put on your mother's good dress, the blue one." Evelyn's stomach turned to ice. Samuel Thornton was a widower, 53 years old, who owned the dry goods store and half the buildings on Main Street. She'd seen him watching her the few times she'd been to town, his gaze lingering in ways that made her skin crawl. He had wet lips and thick fingers, and a reputation for being hard on his help. Why? Though she already knew, Malcolm wouldn't meet her eyes. "Because I told him you'd be here, looking presentable." Don't you paw me." His hand slammed down on the table, making her flinch. "You think keeping this place running is free? You think that food you eat just appears? I got debts, girl. Debts you don't know nothing about." Evelyn slowly stood, her knees protesting from the hard floor. She was 22 years old, thin from too many sparse meals, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dress, not her mother's blue one, but her everyday gray, patched and repatched until it was more patch than original fabric. She'd been beautiful once, people said, before the hunger and the hardship carved the softness from her face. "How much?" she asked quietly. "What? How much do you owe him?" Malcolm's face flushed darker. "That ain't your concern." "It is if you're selling me to settle it." The words hung in the air between them like gun smoke. For a moment, something almost like shame flickered across Malcolm's features, but only for a moment. Then his face hardened into the mask of righteous anger he wore whenever his conscience tried to speak. "Selling? That's marriage, girl. Respectable. You should be grateful. A woman your age, no prospects, plain as a fence post. You think you got better options? Thornton's willing to overlook all that. Willing to take you on, give you a home, security." "I have a home." "You have my home, and when I'm gone, you'll have nothing. This place will go to the bank, and you'll be out on your ear. Thornton's offering $300 and debt forgiveness. That's more than you're worth on the open market, I can tell you that." $300, the price of a decent horse, less than what a good plow cost. Evelyn looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw nothing there she recognized. Whatever love might have existed between them had been drowned years ago, pickled in whiskey and resentment. She was not his daughter. She was an asset to be liquidated, a bargaining chip, livestock to be sold to the highest bidder. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Malcolm stood, unsteady on his feet, and took a step toward her. "You won't refuse." "If I do?" His hand cracked across her face before she could move, splitting her lip, sending her stumbling backward into the wall. Pain exploded bright and sharp, and she tasted blood, metallic and bitter. Her vision swam, but she didn't cry out. She'd learned long ago that crying only made it worse. "You'll do as you're told," Malcolm said, breathing hard, his fist still raised. "You'll put on that blue dress, you'll smile, and you'll be grateful when Samuel Thornton offers to make an honest woman of you. You understand me?" Evelyn touched her lip, her fingers coming away red. She looked at the blood, then at her father, and something inside her, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped clean through. "Yes, Pa," she said softly. "I understand." Malcolm nodded, satisfied, and shuffled back to his chair. "Good. Now clean yourself up. He'll be here within the hour." Evelyn walked to the small room that served as her quarters, barely more than a closet with a bedroll and a trunk containing her few possessions. She closed the door, leaned against it, and allowed herself one shaking breath. Then she got to work. The blue dress her mother had worn to church was folded at the bottom of the trunk, preserved in cotton and cedar. Evelyn pulled it out, held it up to the thin light from the single window. It was beautiful, or had been, silk and lace, the kind of thing that spoke of better times, of a life where people wore fine clothes and had reasons to celebrate. She laid it carefully on the bed and began to change. The dress fit, barely. Her mother had been a larger woman, fuller in the hips and chest, but Evelyn had lost so much weight over the years that the fabric hung loose in places where it should have clung. Still, when she caught her reflection in the small, cracked mirror on the wall, she saw someone she barely recognized. The dress made her look almost like a bride, almost like a woman with a future. She touched her split lip gently, wincing. The blood had mostly stopped, but the swelling would be obvious. Would Thornton care? Probably not. Men like him didn't court women like her for their beauty. They courted them because they were cheap and convenient and had no other options. The sound of hoofbeats and wagon wheels on the dirt road made her stomach clench. He was here. "Evelyn!" Malcolm's voice, sharp with false cheer. "Come out here, girl." She took one last look at herself in the mirror. Dark eyes, hollow cheeks, a mouth swollen from her father's fist. This was who she was. A woman nobody had ever loved, nobody had ever wanted for anything but utility. A woman who'd never been kissed except in violence, never been held except in restraint, never been spoken to with anything but contempt or indifference. "I have never known love," she thought, and the truth of it settled into her bones like winter cold. She opened the door and walked into the main room. Samuel Thornton filled the doorway like a bad omen. He was a big man, heavy through the middle, with thinning gray hair slicked back with pomade and a thick mustache that drooped over his wet lips. He wore a black suit that strained at the buttons, and he carried a hat in his meaty hands, turning it round and round as he smiled at her with tobacco-stained teeth. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice like gravel in a bucket. "Don't you look pretty as a picture?" "Mr. Thornton." Evelyn clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. "Come now, you can call me Samuel. After all, we're about to become much better acquainted." He laughed at his own implication, and Malcolm laughed with him, nervous and eager. "Can I offer you something to drink, Samuel?" Malcolm gestured to the table, which he'd hastily cleared of bottles and set with 2 cups. "Don't mind if I do." The 2 men sat, and Evelyn was left standing on display like merchandise in a shop window. Thornton's eyes traveled over her slowly, appraising, calculating. When he noticed her split lip, his smile widened. "Got a bit of spirit, does she?" he asked Malcolm. "Nothing a firm hand can't manage," Malcolm assured him. "She's a good worker, though. Strong. Knows how to keep a house, cook, sew. All the womanly skills." Thornton took a drink, never taking his eyes off Evelyn. "What about breeding? Any trouble in that department?" Evelyn felt her face burn. They were discussing her fertility as casually as they might discuss a mare's. "Far as I know, she's sound," Malcolm said. Her mother had no trouble. 5 pregnancies, though only this one survived. That'll do. I had 3 sons with my late wife, God rest her, but I wouldn't mind a daughter, someone to care for me in my old age. Thornton set down his cup and stood, moving toward Evelyn with the deliberate slowness of a predator. Let's have a proper look at you then. He reached out and grabbed her chin, turning her face from side to side. His fingers were exactly as she'd imagined, thick, damp, pressing into her skin hard enough to bruise. His breath smelled of tobacco and rotting teeth. Bit thin, he observed. But that's easy enough to remedy. Good bone structure. Teeth? He pressed his thumb against her lips, and she had no choice but to open her mouth. He examined her teeth like a horse trader. Sound enough. How old are you, girl? 22, she managed to say around his thumb. A bit long in the tooth for a first marriage, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers. He released her and stepped back, nodding to himself. I'll take her. Just like that, as casual as buying a pound of flour. Excellent. Malcolm stood, beaming, relief written across every feature. Shall we discuss the terms? $300, as we agreed, plus I'll forgive the $150 you owe me on store credit. The wedding can be next week. Gives me time to make arrangements, get the house ready. She'll move in the day of, naturally. Naturally? Malcolm agreed eagerly. Wait. Evelyn's voice came out smaller than she intended. Both men turned to look at her as if they'd forgotten she could speak. May I have a moment to collect myself? Thornton's expression hardened. Having second thoughts? No, sir. It's all very sudden. I'd like a moment to prepare myself for such a joyful occasion. The lies tasted like ashes, but she forced them out. Malcolm opened his mouth, probably to refuse, but Thornton held up a hand. Let her have her moment. A woman's entitled to a bit of emotion on her engagement day. Don't take too long, though, Miss Hart. We have papers to sign. Thank you. Evelyn fled back to her small room and closed the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. A week. She had 1 week before she became Mrs. Samuel Thornton, before she was bound to him legally and spiritually, before he had the right to do whatever he wished with her body and her life. Before she became his property in every sense of the word. She looked around her tiny room, at the bedroll she'd slept on for 13 years, at the trunk with her few possessions, at the single window that looked out over the endless plains. In the distance, she could just make out the horizon where land met sky, that thin line between here and somewhere else. For years, she'd survived by making herself small, by enduring, by waiting for things to somehow get better. But things never got better. They only got worse in new and creative ways. And now she stood at a crossroads. Marry Samuel Thornton and resign herself to a life of being used until she was used up? Or what? Run? To where? With what money? A woman alone on the frontier was prey. She'd be dead within a week, or worse, picked up by men who'd pass her around like a bottle, use her until there was nothing left to use. But maybe, through the thin walls, she could hear Malcolm and Thornton discussing the details of the transaction. Her transaction, dates, terms, conditions. She pressed her ear to the wood, listening. Wagon train forming up in Independence, Thornton was saying. Leaves in 2 weeks, headed for Oregon. Some of the families need help, cooking, washing, looking after children. Pays $1 a week plus food and protection. Why would I care about that? Malcolm asked. Just making conversation. Thought maybe you'd heard about it. Seems like every week more folks are heading west looking for better prospects. West? The words seemed to glow in Evelyn's mind. She moved to the window and looked out again at that far horizon. West was California gold and Oregon farmland and territories where a person could disappear, could become someone new. West was possibility. West was anywhere but here. The trunk at her feet contained almost nothing of value. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, undergarments, a few books her mother had taught her to read from, a silver locket with her mother's picture. She could pack it all in under 5 minutes. But she had no money. Malcolm kept what little cash they had locked in a strongbox under his bed, and she had no way to get to it without being caught. Unless... Her eyes fell on the blue dress she'd been wearing, silk and lace, worth something to the right buyer. And there was the locket, real silver with a tiny portrait painted on porcelain, her mother's most precious possession. Worth maybe $15, $20. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to get her to Independence to buy passage with that wagon train. The decision crystallized in her mind with a clarity that felt almost like destiny. She would not marry Samuel Thornton. She would not spend the rest of her life being hurt by men who saw her as less than human. She would run, and if she died trying, at least she'd die free. But she had to be smart about it. If she ran now, they'd chase her down before she made it a mile. She needed them to think she was compliant, needed to buy herself time. Evelyn changed back into her gray dress, folded the blue one carefully, and smoothed her hair. She pinched her cheeks to bring color to them and practiced a smile in the mirror. It looked ghastly, a death's head grin, but it would have to do. When she emerged from the room, both men looked up expectantly. "I apologize for my emotion," she said, keeping her voice meek. "It's just such wonderful news. I'm quite overcome." Malcolm looked skeptical, but Thornton seemed pleased. "That's more like it. Come here, girl. Give your betrothed a proper greeting." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but Evelyn forced herself to walk toward him. He pulled her close, his thick arms encircling her, and pressed his wet mouth to hers. The kiss was invasive, possessive, tasting of tobacco and whiskey. She held herself rigid, enduring, until he finally released her. "There now," he said, satisfaction in his voice. "We'll get along just fine, won't we?" "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Samuel," he corrected. "You'll call me Samuel, and after we're wed, you'll call me husband." "Yes, Samuel." He patted her cheek, almost gently, and turned back to Malcolm. "I'll send word about the ceremony details. Next Saturday, I think. The circuit preacher will be through, and we can have it done proper. In the meantime, I expect you'll help her prepare her trousseau, what little a poor man's daughter might bring." Of course, of course. Malcolm was practically rubbing his hands together with glee. "She'll come to you with everything in order." They shook hands, the deal sealed, and Thornton took his leave, but not before giving Evelyn one last lingering look that made her skin crawl. "You'll be a good wife," he said. "I can tell." When he was finally gone, wagon wheels fading into the distance, Malcolm let out a long breath. "Well, that's settled then. You did good, girl. Better than I expected." Evelyn said nothing. She returned to her room, closed the door, and sat on her bedroll in the gathering darkness. Through the walls, she could hear her father celebrating with what sounded like a fresh bottle, singing tunelessly to himself. She had 1 week, 7 days to plan, to prepare, to gather what little courage she possessed, and stake it all on a desperate gamble. That night, after Malcolm had drunk himself into his usual stupor, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The cabin creaked and settled around her, familiar sounds that had marked every night of her life. She thought about her mother, long dead, who'd married Malcolm Hart full of hope and died worn down to nothing. She thought about the baby siblings who'd never drawn breath, buried in tiny graves out beyond the property line. She thought about Samuel Thornton and the life that awaited her as his wife, the same slow death her mother had suffered, just with a different man's hands around her throat. No, she wouldn't accept it, couldn't. In the darkness, she whispered her truth to the universe. "I have never known love. I have never been wanted. I have never been anything but a burden and a commodity. But I will not be bought. I will not be sold. I will run, or I will die trying." The words hung in the air, a prayer and a vow. The next morning, she began her preparations. Over the following days, Evelyn played the part of the dutiful bride-to-be. She mended her dresses, organized the pathetic contents of her trunk, and listened carefully whenever Malcolm talked about Thornton's plans for their marriage. All the while, she was calculating, planning, watching for her opportunity. It came on Thursday afternoon. Malcolm announced he was riding into town to finalize some business with Thornton and wouldn't be back until evening. "Don't burn the place down while I'm gone," he said as he rode off, laughing at his own joke. The moment he was out of sight, Evelyn moved. The strongbox under his bed was locked, but she'd watched him open it enough times to know he kept the key on a leather thong around his neck, except when he was too drunk to remember, in which case he left it in his coat pocket. She searched his room frantically and found it hidden in a boot. Her hands shook as she unlocked the box. Inside was more money than she'd expected. nearly $100 in various bills and coins. Malcolm had been holding out on her, hoarding money while she went hungry. The betrayal stung, but she pushed the feeling aside. She took $40, leaving enough that he might not notice immediately, and locked the box again. Next, she packed her trunk with ruthless efficiency. Her 2 dresses, her undergarments, the books, some dried food she'd been setting aside. And then, with tears streaming down her face, she removed the silver locket from around her neck, the last physical connection to her mother, and tucked it into her pocket. She'd sell it in Independence if she needed more money. The blue dress she folded into a separate bundle. It would fetch a good price. With everything prepared, she hid the trunk under her bed and spent the rest of the afternoon doing her normal chores, just in case Malcolm came home early. She scrubbed floors, hung laundry, prepared dinner. All the while, her mind raced with the details of her escape. The wagon trains left from Independence, Missouri, about 100 miles east. If she left at dawn, walked through the day and into the night, she might make it to the nearest town, about 20 miles, by morning. From there, she could catch a mail coach or freight wagon heading east. With luck and $40, she could make it to Independence before Malcolm even realized she was gone. And Samuel Thornton? Let him try to find her. Let them both try. By the time they figured out where she'd gone, she'd be halfway across the continent with a wagon train full of families beyond their reach forever. When Malcolm finally stumbled home that evening, drunk and cheerful, Evelyn served him dinner and said nothing about her plans. She watched him eat, watched him drink, watched him eventually pass out at the table as he did most nights. And then she retreated to her room and lay awake, waiting for the first light of dawn. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Every creak of the cabin made her jump, certain she'd been discovered. But Malcolm only snored in his chair, dead to the world. Finally, mercifully, the darkness beyond her window began to soften into gray. Dawn. It was time. Evelyn dressed quickly in her sturdiest clothes, pulled on her worn boots, and shouldered her trunk. It was heavier than she'd hoped. She'd have to carry it miles, but she couldn't leave anything behind. Everything she owned, everything she was, fit in this single battered box. She paused at the door of her room for one last look. 13 years she'd lived in this closet-sized space. 13 years of making herself small, making herself quiet, making herself nothing. That woman was dying here tonight. Someone new would be born on the road. In the main room, Malcolm still slept in his chair, mouth open, a line of drool running into his beard. Evelyn studied his face, looking for some last flicker of paternal feeling, some reason to stay. She found nothing. He was just a man who'd failed at everything he'd ever tried, including fatherhood. "Goodbye, Pa," she whispered. Then she walked out the door and didn't look back. The pre-dawn air was cool and fresh, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Evelyn walked east toward the rising sun, her trunk growing heavier with each step. The plains stretched before her, endless and indifferent, but also full of possibility. Every step was a step away from Samuel Thornton. Every step was a choice she was making for herself. By the time the sun fully cleared the horizon, she'd put 3 miles between herself and Malcolm Hart's cabin. Her arms ached, her feet were already developing blisters, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. "I will not be bought," she told herself with each step. "I will not be sold. I am worth more than $300. I am worth more than a broken-down drunk's gambling debt." The road stretched before her, dusty and rutted, leading toward a future she couldn't see but knew she had to reach for. Somewhere ahead lay Independence. Somewhere beyond that lay the West, territories and possibilities, places where a woman might remake herself, might find something she'd never known, might find love. The word caught in her throat like a sob. Love. What a strange foreign concept. She'd read about it in her mother's books, tales of knights and ladies, of passion and devotion, but those were just stories. In real life, women were property, and love was a luxury reserved for people with better prospects. Still, as Evelyn walked into the rising sun, her shadow stretching long behind her, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, somewhere in all those territories and townships and wagon trains heading west, there was a life waiting for her. Maybe there was a version of herself who was wanted, cherished, seen as something more than a burden to be married off. Maybe, just maybe, she would find what she'd never known. But first, she had to survive. She had to make it to Independence, had to convince a wagon master to take her on despite her lack of funds and references. She had to travel 2,000 miles across hostile territory, had to endure heat and hunger and the constant threat of death. The odds were terrible. The risks were enormous. But as Evelyn Hart walked away from the only life she'd ever known, she found she didn't care. Even if she died trying, at least she'd die as herself. At least she'd die having chosen her own path. The sun climbed higher. The miles passed slowly beneath her boots. And with each step, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Something that might have been hope, or might have been the first fragile stirrings of freedom. She was running toward an uncertain future, yes, but she was also running toward herself, toward the person she might become if given the chance. And for the first time in her 22 years, Evelyn Hart allowed herself to believe that she might be worth saving after all. The first 20 miles nearly killed her. Evelyn's arms felt like they were being pulled from their sockets by the third hour, the trunk's leather handle cutting grooves into her palms, despite the calluses already there from years of hard labor. The sun climbed higher, turning the Kansas plains into a skillet, and sweat soaked through her dress until it clung to her back like a second skin. Her boots, already worn thin, rubbed blisters onto both heels and the balls of her feet. Each step became an act of will. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every minute she rested was a minute Malcolm might wake up, might discover her gone, might come riding after her on his horse while she was still within reach. So she walked through the pain, walked through the exhaustion, walked until the sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western horizon. The town of Harding's Junction appeared like a mirage in the late afternoon heat. A collection of weathered buildings huddled around a crossroads, population maybe 200 on a good day. Evelyn staggered into the general store, her legs trembling, and nearly collapsed against the counter. The proprietor, a stern-faced woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, looked her up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd seen plenty of desperate people come through her doors. "You running from something or toward something?" the woman asked bluntly. Evelyn's throat was so dry she could barely speak. "Water, please. I can pay." The woman filled a dipper from a barrel and handed it over. Evelyn drank like she'd been wandering the desert for days. The cool water, the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. When she finally came up for air, the woman was still watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. "I asked you a question." "Both," Evelyn admitted. "I need passage east, to Independence. Is there a mail coach or freight wagon heading that direction?" "Freight wagon left yesterday. Mail coach comes through day after tomorrow." The woman paused. "You got money for fare?" "Yes." "And you're running from a man, I'd wager. Husband? Father?" Evelyn set down the dipper with shaking hands. "Does it matter?" "Might. If he comes looking for you, I need to know whether to tell him you were here or play dumb." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I've seen plenty of women come through here trying to escape bad situations. Some make it, some don't. The ones who make it are honest about what they're running from." Something about the woman's directness, her lack of judgment, made Evelyn's carefully constructed walls crack. "My father sold me to settle his debts. The man who bought me, I couldn't. I wouldn't." The woman nodded as if this confirmed what she'd already suspected. "Fair enough. Name's Margaret Erickson. I own this store and the boarding house next door. You can stay there until the mail coach comes, $2 for room and board. Cheaper than what you'd spend trying to camp on the roadside, and safer." "Thank you." The relief was so intense Evelyn's knees almost buckled. "Don't thank me yet. If your father or this man come looking, I'll tell them I haven't seen you. But if they cause trouble for my other guests, you'll have to leave. I protect my own first." "I understand." Margaret led her to the boarding house, a 2-story structure that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. The room she showed Evelyn to was small, but had a real bed with actual linens, a wash basin, and a window that looked out over the main street. After years of sleeping on a bedroll in a closet, it felt like a palace. "Supper's at 6, Margaret said. "Water for washing is downstairs. You look like you could use some rest." The moment Margaret left, Evelyn collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to darkness and the sound of raised voices from somewhere below. Panic seized her. Had they found her already? But as she came fully awake, she realized the voices were laughing, not angry. Travelers in the common room, sharing a meal and stories. The homey smell of cooking meat and fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards. Evelyn splashed water on her face, changed into her less dusty dress, and made her way downstairs. The common room was full of people, more than she'd expected for such a small town. A dozen men and women sat around long tables, eating and talking. Margaret moved between them with practiced efficiency, serving food and refilling cups. When she spotted Evelyn, she gestured to an empty space at the end of one table. "Sit. Eat. You look like you need it." The food was simple: stew, bread, coffee, but it was hot and plentiful. Evelyn ate slowly, aware of the curious glances from the other diners. A young woman traveling alone always attracted attention, usually the wrong kind. "You heading west?" The question came from a middle-aged woman sitting across from her, round-faced and kind-eyed. "I'm Clara Morrison. That's my husband Daniel over there, and our 3 children." She gestured to a tired-looking man and 3 youngsters ranging from about 5 to 10 years old. "East, actually," Evelyn said, "to Independence." "Oh. Most folks are going the other direction these days. We're joining a wagon train heading to Oregon. Fresh start, cheap land, opportunity." Clara's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Daniel's a carpenter. We figure there's good work to be had building up new territories." "Sounds promising," Evelyn said, though she knew nothing about Oregon except that it was far away. "If you change your mind about direction, you should come with us." Clara's enthusiasm was infectious. "We're meeting up with the train in Independence, then heading out first week of May. Always room for one more, especially women who can help with cooking and child-minding. The wagon master's always looking for extra hands." Something in Evelyn's chest tightened at the casual kindness, the easy invitation. When was the last time someone had wanted her company without expecting something in return? "I'll keep that in mind," she managed to say. The conversation flowed around her as the other travelers shared their plans and dreams. Most were heading west, farmers seeking better land, merchants hoping to establish stores in growing territories, families running from debts or tragedies, or simply the grinding poverty of failed farms and played-out soil. They spoke of California gold, Oregon forests, territories where a person could claim 160 acres just for settling it. The West. It kept coming up, this mythical place of second chances and fresh starts. Evelyn had only planned as far as Independence, as far as getting away from Malcolm and Samuel Thornton. But listening to these people talk about the possibilities waiting beyond the horizon, something stirred in her, a hunger she hadn't known she possessed. What was waiting for her in Independence after all? She had $40 and no plan beyond get away. She could maybe find work as a seamstress or washerwoman, rent a room somewhere, eke out a living. It would be better than marrying Thornton, certainly, but it would still be the same life, just in a different location, still being the woman nobody wanted, still scratching out an existence on the margins. But the West promised transformation. The West promised that you could become someone new. "Tell me more about this wagon train," Evelyn said to Clara, and the other woman's face lit up with delight. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous waiting. Margaret gave her work in the store to help pay for her keep, and Evelyn threw herself into it gratefully. Anything to keep her mind occupied, to keep from thinking about Malcolm discovering her absence, imagining his rage, his pursuit. Every time the door opened, she jumped, expecting to see him burst through with murder in his eyes. But he never came. The mail coach arrived on schedule, but Evelyn didn't board it. Instead, she joined the Morrisons and 5 other families on a freight wagon heading to Independence with supplies. The wagon master, a grizzled old teamster named Gus, had agreed to take passengers for $2 a head. It would be slower than the mail coach, more uncomfortable, but Evelyn would arrive with money still in her pocket and newfound friends to vouch for her. The journey to Independence took 4 days. Evelyn rode in the back of the wagon with Clara and the children, enduring the constant jolting and the children's endless energy with patience born of necessity. Clara chattered constantly, full of plans and dreams for their new life in Oregon. Her husband Daniel was quieter, more cautious, but even he seemed caught up in the fever of possibility. "You should really consider joining our train," Clara said, for the 10th time as they approached Independence. "A woman alone, even in a city, it's not safe. And we could use someone with your skills. You can read and write, you can sew, you're good with children. That's valuable out on the trail." "I'll think about it," Evelyn said, though she'd already made up her mind. The West called to her now, as it seemed to call to everyone with something to run from or something to run toward. Why stop in Independence when she could keep going, could put half a continent between herself and her old life? Independence was a revelation. After the quiet isolation of her father's farm and the sleepy emptiness of Harding's Junction, the bustling frontier town felt like stepping into another world. The streets teemed with people, families preparing for the journey west, merchants selling supplies at inflated prices, con men working the crowds, prostitutes plying their trade. The air rang with the sounds of hammers on anvils, oxen lowing, children shouting, all of it underpinned by a fever of anticipation. This was the jumping-off point, the last threshold of civilization before the great unknown. Beyond Independence lay 2,000 miles of prairie, mountain, and desert. Beyond Independence lay transformation or death, often both. Clara dragged Evelyn to the mustering grounds where wagon trains were forming up. Dozens of wagons stood in loose circles, families clustered around them like pilot fish around sharks. Men argued over routes and supplies, while women tried to organize children and provisions. The chaos was overwhelming. "There, that's Captain William Thorne." Clara pointed to a tall, weathered man in his 50s addressing a group of families. "He's the wagon master. Daniel talked to him yesterday. We're confirmed for the first departure in 2 weeks." They pushed through the crowd until they reached the captain's side. He was explaining something about water barrels and rationing, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made this journey before and survived to tell about it. "Captain Thorne," Clara called out. "This is Evelyn Hart, the woman I mentioned. She's an excellent cook and seamstress, and she's wonderful with children." Thorne's sharp blue eyes assessed Evelyn in a single glance, taking in her worn dress, her nervous posture, the trunk clutched in her hands. "You looking to sign on, Miss Hart?" Yes, if there's room." "There's always room for working hands. But I'll be straight with you. The journey to Oregon takes 5-6 months if we're lucky. It's hard travel. People die. Women especially need to be tough. You tough, Miss Hart?" Evelyn thought about the 20 miles she'd walked carrying her trunk, about leaving everything she'd ever known on nothing but hope and $40. "I'm tougher than I look." A hint of approval flickered across Thorne's face. "I believe you might be. Cost is $200 for passage, but if you're willing to work, cooking for families who need it, helping with the sick, general labor, I can reduce that to $50 plus your labor. Fair?" $50. She had 40. "Could you make it 40? 35, final offer, and you work harder than anyone else on this train. I don't tolerate freeloaders." "Deal." Evelyn stuck out her hand and Thorne shook it, his grip firm and calloused. "We leave May 1st, dawn. Be here ready to work or don't come at all." That gave her 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to buy supplies, to transform the last of her money into the tools of survival. Clara helped her navigate the chaos of Independence's markets, helped her distinguish fair prices from highway robbery. Evelyn bought sturdy boots, a good wool blanket, a tin cup and plate, a knife, matches, and as much dried food as she could carry. She sold her mother's blue dress to a dress shop for $10, less than it was worth, but she needed the money. The locket she kept, her last connection to a woman who'd loved her, however briefly. The 2 weeks passed quickly, filled with preparations and growing excitement. Evelyn stayed with the Morrisons, helping Clara with the children and learning what she could about the journey ahead. At night, she lay awake in the darkness, wondering if Malcolm had come looking for her, if Samuel Thornton had posted a reward for her return. But Independence was big enough to get lost in, and soon she'd be gone entirely, swallowed up by the vastness of the American frontier. On the last night before departure, Clara found Evelyn sitting outside the wagon, staring up at the stars. "Nervous?" Clara asked, settling down beside her. "Terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I've never been more than 20 miles from where I was born. Now I'm about to travel 2,000 miles into territory I can't even imagine." That's what makes it exciting. Clara's face glowed in the moonlight. We're going to be pioneers, Evelyn. We're going to build new lives in a new land. Our children will grow up in a place we chose, not a place we were trapped in. You really believe that? That we can just start over? Become different people? I have to believe it. Because if I don't, what's the point? What's the point of dragging my family across the continent if we're just carrying all our old problems with us? Clara squeezed Evelyn's hand. You ran away from something. I can tell. And that's fine. Everyone on this train is running from something or toward something. But out there, she gestured toward the darkness beyond the edge of town, out there, you get to decide who you become. The words settled into Evelyn's chest like an ember, warm and glowing. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe the journey west wasn't just about escape. Maybe it was about transformation, about becoming the person she'd never had the chance to be. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. Dawn came cold and clear, the air sharp with possibility. The wagon train assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, 23 wagons, 67 people, livestock and supplies and dreams all bundled together for the long journey. Captain Thorne rode up and down the line on his big roan horse, barking orders and organizing the chaos into something resembling order. Evelyn had been assigned to help 3 families who lacked women to do the cooking: the Johnsons, a widower with 2 teenage sons, the Cairns, a young couple with an infant, and the Pattersons, an elderly pair traveling to meet their son in Oregon. She would rotate between the 3 wagons, preparing meals and helping with whatever needed doing. In exchange, they'd share their supplies with her and give her a place to sleep. As the sun crested the horizon, Thorne raised his hand. Wagons, ho! The train lurched into motion, wheels creaking, oxen straining against their yokes. Evelyn walked beside the Morrison wagon, Clara's youngest child riding on her shoulders, and watched independence disappear behind them. With each step, she left her old life further behind. Malcolm Hart, Samuel Thornton, the woman she'd been forced to be. With each step, she moved toward something unknown, but infinitely better than what she was leaving. The first week on this trail passed in a blur of new experiences and harsh lessons. Walking 15 miles a day was different from walking 20 miles in desperation. It was relentless, grinding, day after day with no respite. Evelyn's feet, barely recovered from her initial flight, developed new blisters that burst and bled and crusted over. Her back ached from sleeping on the hard ground. Her hands cracked from constant work, cooking over smoky fires, washing clothes in cold creek water, helping hitch and unhitch oxen. But she wasn't alone in her suffering. Everyone on the train was learning the same brutal lessons about frontier travel. The women especially formed a quiet sisterhood born of shared hardship. They helped each other with the endless labor, taught each other tricks for making meals stretch, nursed each other's children when illness struck. Evelyn found herself part of this sisterhood almost without meaning to. She'd spent so long isolated, so long being nothing but a burden, that it startled her when other women sought her out for companionship. Clara introduced her to everyone, and soon Evelyn knew the names and stories of every family on the train. There was Mary Johnson, traveling with her husband Thomas, and their 4 daughters, fleeing debts back in Missouri. Sarah Kern, barely 18 and already a mother, trying to make a better life for her baby son. Elizabeth Patterson, who'd been making this same journey for 3 months now and had stories about storms and river crossings that made everyone's blood run cold. Miriam Foster, sharp-tongued and practical, who'd been widowed at 25 and was heading west to claim her late husband's land grant. These women shared their food, their wisdom, their laughter. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because she was useful, though she was, but because they genuinely seemed to enjoy her company. They asked her opinion on things. They saved seats for her at the evening fires. They included her in their conversations and their private jokes. It was intoxicating. "You're different than you were 2 weeks ago," Clara observed one evening as they sat by the fire, mending clothes. "You smile more. You talk more." Evelyn considered this. "I think I forgot how. To smile, I mean. It's been so long since I had a reason to. And now? Now I have lots of reasons." Evelyn looked around at the circle of wagons, at families settling in for the night, at the vast prairie stretching to the horizon. I'm free, Clara. For the first time in my life, I'm actually free. But freedom, as Evelyn was about to learn, came with its own dangers. They were 3 weeks into the journey, following the Kansas River west, when the first signs of trouble appeared. Captain Thorne called a halt earlier than usual and gathered the men for a meeting. Evelyn watched from the Morrison wagon as the men clustered around Thorne, their faces grave. "What's happening?" she asked Clara. "Indian signs, probably," Clara said, though her voice was tight with worry. "We knew this was Apache territory. Thorne said they'd been active lately, raiding wagon trains, taking livestock. Do they attack people?" "Sometimes. Usually they just want supplies, food, weapons, horses. But if someone tries to fight them..." Clara trailed off, leaving the implications unsaid. The men returned to their wagons with orders to keep rifles loaded and be ready to circle up at a moment's notice. That night, everyone slept uneasy, starting at every sound from beyond the firelight. The attack came at dawn 3 days later. Evelyn was helping Sarah Kern prepare breakfast, the baby fussing in his cradleboard hung from the wagon, when someone shouted. She looked up and saw them, riders on the horizon, perhaps 20 of them, coming fast. For a moment, her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Then someone screamed, "Apache!" and chaos erupted. "Get to the wagons!" Captain Thorne's voice cut through the panic. "Form the circle! Women and children inside! Men to the perimeter!" Evelyn grabbed Sarah and the baby and ran. All around them, families were scrambling for cover, men grabbing rifles, children crying in terror. The wagons began to move, trying to form a defensive circle, but they were too slow, too disorganized. The Apache hit them like a hammer. They came in fast and low, riding with a skill that made even the best white horsemen look clumsy by comparison. Their war cries split the morning air, ululating calls that raised every hair on Evelyn's neck. Arrows flew, and one of the oxen bellowed and went down thrashing. A man screamed, clutching at an arrow in his shoulder. "Get down!" someone shouted, and Evelyn threw herself flat, pulling Sarah with her. The baby was screaming now, a sound that cut through everything else. The Apache circled the train like wolves, shooting arrows, testing defenses. The men returned fire with their rifles, but hitting a moving target from horseback was nearly impossible. One of the raiders went down, then another, but the rest pressed their attack. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was real. She might die here, barely 3 weeks into her new life, killed by strangers in a land she didn't understand. A warrior broke through the line, his horse jumping over a wagon tongue. He was young, maybe Clara's age, his face painted with red ochre stripes. His eyes locked on Evelyn and Sarah huddled together, and he wheeled his horse toward them, raising his bow. Time seemed to slow. Evelyn saw the arrow knocked, saw his arm draw back, saw Sarah frozen in terror beneath her. And something in Evelyn, some instinct she didn't know she possessed, made her move. She threw herself over Sarah and the baby, covering them with her own body, and waited for the arrow that would end her. It didn't come. When Evelyn dared to look up, the warrior was still there, his arrow drawn but not released. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. Their eyes met across the chaos, and for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then someone fired a rifle near Evelyn's head, and the warrior's horse reared. He wheeled away, rejoining the others, and as quickly as they'd come, the Apache withdrew. They rode back toward the horizon, taking with them 3 horses and one of the supply wagons they'd managed to cut loose in the confusion. The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn slowly sat up, her ears ringing, her whole body trembling. Sarah clutched her baby and sobbed. All around the circle, people were calling out to each other, checking for injuries, trying to process what had just happened. "Is everyone all right?" Captain Thorne's voice, rough but steady. "Sound off!" One man dead, Mr. Patterson, shot through the throat with an arrow. 3 wounded, including his wife Elizabeth, who'd taken an arrow through her upper arm. The material losses were significant: horses, supplies, ammunition spent. But they'd survived. As the initial shock wore off and people began to tend to the wounded, Evelyn found herself shaking so badly she could barely stand. Clara found her and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You saved them," Clara said. You saved Sarah and the baby. You're a hero." But Evelyn didn't feel like a hero. She felt terrified and small and acutely aware of how close she'd come to dying. She kept seeing that warrior's face, kept seeing the moment when he could have killed her, but didn't. Why? Why had he spared her? That night, as they buried Mr. Patterson in a shallow grave marked with stones, Captain Thorne addressed the entire train. "I won't lie to you folks," he said, his voice heavy. "This won't be the last we see of them. We're in their territory, and they don't want us here. We can turn back or we can push forward, but either way, we're at risk." "What do you recommend?" Thomas Johnson asked. "I recommend we keep going. We've got weapons, we've got numbers. If we stay alert, stay together, we can make it through. But everyone needs to understand, this is the reality of the trail. People die. We knew that when we started." A murmur ran through the crowd, some agreement, some dissent. In the end, they voted to continue. They'd come too far to turn back now. As the meeting broke up and families returned to their wagons, Evelyn stood at the edge of the camp, looking out at the dark prairie. Somewhere out there, those Apache warriors were camped, probably celebrating their raid, probably planning their next one. And somewhere out there was the young warrior who'd spared her life. She touched her chest where his arrow would have struck and felt her heart beating beneath her palm, strong and steady. She was alive. Against all odds, despite everything, she was still alive. "Thank you," she whispered to the darkness, to the warrior she'd never see again, to whatever force had stayed his hand. The stars overhead burned cold and distant, offering no answers. But Evelyn didn't need answers. She needed to keep moving, keep surviving, keep pushing toward that distant horizon where a new life waited. She turned and walked back to the wagons, back to the circle of firelight and her newfound family. Behind her, the darkness held its secrets, and somewhere in that darkness, a young Apache warrior rode toward his own destiny, carrying the memory of a woman who'd thrown herself in front of death to save others. Their paths had crossed for a heartbeat. In the vast story of the frontier, it was the smallest moment, barely worth noting. But sometimes the smallest moments change everything. The wagon train pushed deeper into Apache territory with the caution of prey animals crossing a predator's hunting ground. Captain Thorne doubled the watch, kept the wagons tight together, and forbade anyone from straying more than 50 yards from the circle. The easy camaraderie of the first weeks gave way to nervous glances at every rise in the terrain, every shadow that might hide a warrior. Evelyn found herself scanning the horizons constantly, though she couldn't have said whether she was looking for danger or for something else. The face of the young warrior haunted her dreams, those dark eyes meeting hers across the chaos, that moment of inexplicable mercy. She'd told no one about it, not even Clara. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Elizabeth Patterson recovered slowly from her arrow wound, the injury turning fevered and angry despite the poultices and whiskey the other women applied. She grew delirious, calling out for her dead husband in the night, and Evelyn took turns with the other women sitting vigil beside her wagon. On the 5th night after the attack, Elizabeth finally broke her fever, waking lucid and asking for water. "You stayed with me," Elizabeth said, her voice raspy as Evelyn helped her drink. "All of you, why?" "Because that's what we do," Evelyn replied simply. "We take care of each other." "I barely know you. You owe me nothing." Evelyn thought about that, about debts and obligations and the ways people were expected to repay kindness with servitude. Maybe that's exactly why. Because I don't owe you anything, so helping you is a choice, not an obligation. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "My Harold is gone. I don't know how to do this without him." "You do it the same way the rest of us do. One step at a time, one day at a time." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "And you don't do it alone." The older woman nodded, too exhausted for more words, and drifted back to sleep. Evelyn sat with her until dawn, watching the stars wheel overhead and thinking about choices, about how she'd chosen to run, chosen to join this wagon train, chosen to throw herself over Sarah and the baby when death came riding. She'd spent 22 years having no choices at all. Now every day was full of them, and each choice was teaching her who she might become. 3 more weeks passed without incident. The landscape changed gradually as they followed the Arkansas River west, the endless prairie giving way to rougher terrain, the grass shorter and more sparse, the air drier. They saw buffalo in the distance, great dark herds that seemed to flow across the land like water. They passed the bones of previous expeditions, abandoned wagons, crude graves, the detritus of dreams that had died on the trail. Captain Thorne kept them moving at a steady pace, knowing that winter would come early in the mountains and they needed to be through the worst passes before the snows. They rose before dawn and walked until sunset, covering 15 to 20 miles a day, depending on the terrain. The work was relentless, exhausting, but Evelyn found she didn't mind it. Physical labor left no room for dwelling on the past, and the sheer effort of survival gave purpose to each day. She rotated between her 3 assigned families, learning each one's rhythms and quirks. The Johnsons were quiet and efficient, the father and sons working together with few words needed. The Kearns were young and optimistic, still honeymoon bright despite the hardships. The Pattersons, now just Elizabeth alone, needed more help, and Evelyn gave it gladly, sitting with the widow in the evenings and listening to stories about her 50 years of marriage, her children scattered across 3 states, the son in Oregon who didn't even know his father was dead yet. "You remind me of myself at your age," Elizabeth said one night as they sat by the fire mending clothes. "That same look in your eyes, like you're waiting for the world to hit you again, but you're determined to take it standing." "Is that how you survived? Just taking it?" "At first. But eventually, you learn that surviving isn't the same as living. Surviving is holding your breath underwater. Living is coming up for air and taking a deep breath, even when you're scared of drowning." Elizabeth's needle moved steadily through the fabric, her hands sure despite her age. "You're still holding your breath, child. I can see it." Evelyn wanted to argue, but couldn't. Elizabeth was right. Even here, even free, she was still braced for the blow, still waiting for someone to take this new life away from her. "How do you stop?" she asked quietly. "You trust. In God, in yourself, in the people around you. You let yourself believe that good things can happen without punishment following." Elizabeth tied off her thread and looked at Evelyn with eyes that had seen decades of hardship and joy in equal measure. "You let yourself be loved, child. That's the hardest and most important thing." "I have never known love." The words rose in Evelyn's throat, but she swallowed them back. They felt too raw, too revealing, like showing a wound that had never properly healed. The second attack came 6 weeks into the journey, on a morning that had dawned clear and hot. They were crossing a stretch of broken country, all gullies and dried creek beds, when the Apache struck again. But this time the raid was different, larger, more organized. They came from 3 directions at once, perhaps 40 warriors, cutting the wagon train in half before anyone could react. Captain Thorne shouted orders, trying to organize a defense, but the Apache were too fast, too coordinated. They drove a wedge between the front and back halves of the train, isolating wagons, creating chaos. Evelyn was with the Morrison wagon when the attack began. She heard Clara scream and turned to see warriors cutting the oxen free, 2 of them grabbing at the children. Daniel Morrison fired his rifle, and one of the warriors went down, but then another warrior was on him, a war club raised. Without thinking, Evelyn ran toward them. She had no weapon, no plan, just the desperate need to help the family that had been kind to her. She threw herself at the warrior attacking Daniel, hitting him with all her weight, and they both went down in a tangle of limbs. The warrior recovered first, pinning her to the ground, his knee on her chest. He raised his knife, and Evelyn stared up at him, seeing her death in his eyes. This was it. This was how her story ended. Not from her father's fists or Samuel Thornton's cruelty, but here in the dust of Kansas, killed trying to save people she'd known for barely 2 months. "Stop!" The word was sharp, commanding, in a language Evelyn didn't understand. The warrior holding her froze, looking past her at someone she couldn't see. Then the weight was gone from her chest, and Evelyn scrambled backward, gasping. A rider sat on a paint horse above her, and when she looked up into his face, her breath caught. It was him. The young warrior from the first attack, the one who'd spared her life. He sat tall on his horse, one hand raised to stop the warrior who'd been about to kill her, his dark eyes fixed on Evelyn's face with an intensity that made her shiver. He spoke again in his language, a series of rapid commands, and the other warrior replied, clearly arguing. But the young warrior's voice cut through the argument with an authority that surprised Evelyn. This wasn't just another raider. This was someone the others deferred to. Around them, the battle was ending. The Apache had what they'd come for: livestock, supplies, chaos, and were beginning to withdraw. But the young warrior didn't move. He stayed on his horse, looking down at Evelyn, and she found she couldn't look away. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you keep sparing me?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question, even though he couldn't possibly understand English. Then he leaned down from his horse, extending his hand toward her. "No." Daniel Morrison's voice, hoarse with fear and fury. "Evelyn, get away from him!" But Evelyn didn't move. Something in the warrior's eyes held her frozen, not fear exactly, but a kind of recognition, like he saw something in her that no one else had ever seen. The decision crystallized in a single heartbeat. She reached up and took his hand. His grip was strong, calloused, and he pulled her up behind him on the horse with easy strength. Evelyn barely had time to register what was happening before the horse was moving, galloping away from the wagon train, away from Clara's screaming, away from everything she'd known for the past 6 weeks. "Evelyn," Clara's voice breaking with anguish. "Evelyn, no!" The warrior kicked his horse faster, and the wagon train fell away behind them. Other riders fell in around them, the raiding party, withdrawing with their prizes. Evelyn clung to the warrior's back, her heart hammering, terror and something else she couldn't name flooding through her veins. What had she done? She'd just let herself be taken by Apache raiders, let herself be carried away from the only people who'd ever shown her kindness. But in that moment when he'd extended his hand, when their eyes had met, she'd felt something impossible: trust. They rode for hours, the landscape blurring past, until Evelyn's legs ached from gripping the horse and her arms trembled from holding on. The sun climbed to its zenith and began its descent toward the western horizon. Just when Evelyn thought she couldn't endure another minute, the raiding party crested a rise and she saw it: an Apache camp nestled in a hidden canyon, perhaps 60 people, with hide lodges clustered around a clear stream. The return of the raiders was met with celebration, women ululating in welcome, children running to greet fathers and brothers, dogs barking. The young warrior dismounted and helped Evelyn down, his hands gentle despite their strength. She stood on shaking legs, surrounded by people who looked at her with curiosity and suspicion in equal measure. An older woman approached, her face weathered and wise, her gray hair braided with silver ornaments. She studied Evelyn for a long moment, then spoke to the young warrior in rapid Apache. He responded, gesturing to Evelyn, and the older woman's eyes widened. She turned to Evelyn and spoke in halting English that surprised them both. "You... come. Food. Water." Evelyn followed the woman to a lodge at the edge of the camp, too overwhelmed to resist. Inside, the lodge was dim and cool, smelling of sage and leather. The woman gestured for Evelyn to sit, then brought her water in a clay bowl and strips of dried meat. "Eat," the woman commanded. Evelyn ate, suddenly aware of how hungry she was, how thirsty. The woman watched her with those sharp eyes, and when Evelyn had finished, she spoke again. "I am Nalin, grandmother of Talon." She gestured toward the front of the lodge, where presumably the young warrior stood guard. "Talon bring you here. Why?" "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "He spared me twice. I don't understand why." Nalin studied her face for so long that Evelyn began to squirm. Then the older woman reached out and touched Evelyn's cheek with surprising gentleness. "You have eyes like his sister," Nalin said softly. "Empty eyes, searching eyes. His sister, she died 2 summers ago, the spotted sickness. Before she died, her eyes looked like yours, like someone waiting to be seen." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes, though she couldn't have explained why. "I'm sorry for your loss. Talon, he sees you at wagon train, sees empty eyes, sees you save others even when afraid, sees..." Nalin paused, searching for words. "Sees someone worth saving. What will happen to me? You stay. You work. You learn our ways." Nalin's expression was pragmatic. "Or you die. Apache do not keep weak ones. You show you are strong, you stay. You show you are weak." She made a cutting gesture across her throat. The bluntness should have terrified Evelyn, but instead, She felt an odd calm settle over her. This wasn't so different from what Captain Thorne had said when she'd joined the wagon train. Prove yourself useful, or don't come at all. The terms were harsher here, the stakes higher, but at least they were honest. I can work, Evelyn said. I can prove I'm strong. Nalin nodded, satisfied. We see. Tomorrow, you begin. That night, Evelyn lay on a buffalo hide in Nalin's lodge, staring up at the smoke hole where stars were visible beyond. She was a captive of the Apache, taken from the wagon train, separated from Clara and the Morrisons and everyone she'd grown to care about. By all rights, she should be terrified, planning escape, weeping for her lost freedom. But she wasn't. Instead, she felt strangely calm, almost curious. She'd been taken once before, by her father's debts, by Samuel Thornton's purchase, and that had filled her with despair. But this felt different. Talon had chosen her, had seen something in her worth saving, and he'd offered her his hand, not forced her to take it. She'd chosen to go with him. That was the difference. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the camp settling for the night. Voices murmuring in Apache, dogs barking, a baby crying. Normal sounds, domestic sounds. These people weren't the savage raiders the wagon train had feared. They were families trying to survive in a land that was being taken from them piece by piece. Tomorrow she would begin learning their ways. Tomorrow she would prove she was strong enough to survive in this new world. But tonight, she whispered into the darkness the same words she'd spoken months ago in her father's cabin. I have never known love. This time, though, they felt different. Not like a lament, but like a question. Not a statement of permanent truth, but an acknowledgement of possibility. Maybe, in this strange new place, that could change. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of exhausting labor and constant learning. Nalin woke Evelyn before dawn each morning and set her to work, grinding corn between stones, hauling water from the stream, scraping hides, gathering wood. The work was hard, harder than anything on the wagon train, and Evelyn's hands blistered and bled. But she didn't complain. She'd promised to prove her strength, and she would keep that promise. The other women watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. Some ignored her completely, treating her as beneath notice. Others tested her, giving her the heaviest loads to carry, the most difficult tasks. One young woman, barely older than Evelyn, seemed particularly hostile, spitting near her feet whenever Evelyn passed. That is Casa, Nalin explained one evening. She was promised to Talon before he saw you. She is angry. I didn't mean to, Evelyn began, but Nalin cut her off. What you mean does not matter. What happens is what happens. Talon chose to bring you here. Now he must decide what to do with you. What are my options? Nalin's laugh was dry as desert sand. You become his wife. You become slave to his family. You die. Those are options. Wife. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. Evelyn had run away to avoid becoming Samuel Thornton's wife, had fled across Kansas to escape that fate. And now she was faced with the same choice in wildly different circumstances, marry or suffer worse consequences. But was it the same? Thornton had bought her like livestock. Talon had, what, captured her? Saved her? She couldn't reconcile the two ideas, couldn't make sense of the confusing swirl of emotion she felt when she caught glimpses of him around the camp. He watched her often. She'd feel his eyes on her as she worked, would look up to find him standing at a distance, his expression unreadable. He never approached her, never spoke to her, just watched, like he was trying to figure her out, the same way she was trying to figure him out. 3 weeks into her captivity, Evelyn was gathering firewood at the edge of the camp when Casa confronted her. The young Apache woman stepped into Evelyn's path, her face twisted with fury, and unleashed a torrent of angry words in a language Evelyn couldn't understand. I'm sorry, Evelyn said, holding up her hands in a placating gesture. I don't understand. Casa shoved her, hard, and Evelyn stumbled backward, dropping her armload of wood. The other woman advanced, still shouting, and Evelyn realized with a cold shock that this wasn't just an argument, this was a challenge. I didn't ask for any of this, Evelyn tried to explain, backing up. I didn't ask him to bring me here. Casa hit her, a sharp blow to the face that split Evelyn's lip and sent her reeling. Pain exploded bright and familiar, and suddenly Evelyn was back in her father's cabin, taking his fists, enduring because she had no other choice. But she did have choices now. She'd learned that on the trail west. She'd learned it every time she'd chosen to help someone, chosen to run, chosen to take Talon's hand. When Casa came at her again, Evelyn didn't back down. She planted her feet and met the attack head on, grappling with the other woman, both of them falling into the dust. They rolled and struggled, scratching and hitting, a tangle of fury and desperation. Evelyn had never fought back before, not against her father, not against anyone, and the savage satisfaction of it shocked her. Strong hands pulled them apart. Talon stood between them, his face dark with anger, speaking sharp words that made Casa flinch. He pushed her away toward the camp, and she went, but not before shooting Evelyn a look of pure hatred. Then Talon turned to Evelyn. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away if she wanted to, and touched her split lip gently. His fingers came away bloody, and something in his expression softened. He spoke, his voice low and careful, clearly wanting her to understand even though they shared no language. Then he pulled something from the pouch at his belt, a small stone, turquoise blue, polished smooth. He pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "First gift," he said in halting, heavily accented English. "I see you." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "I see you. Not I own you, not I control you. I see you." All her life she'd been invisible. To her father, to the people in town, to everyone who'd look through her as if she didn't exist. Even on the wagon train, she'd been valued for what she could do, not for who she was. But Talon saw her. Had seen her from that first moment when she'd thrown herself over Sarah and the baby. Had seen something in her worth saving, worth bringing here, worth giving this small, perfect gift. Evelyn looked down at the turquoise stone in her hand, then back up at Talon. His dark eyes were steady on hers, patient. Her from that first moment when she'd thrown herself over Sarah and the baby. Had seen something in her worth saving, worth bringing here, worth giving this small, perfect gift. Evelyn looked down at the turquoise stone in her hand, then back up at Talon. His dark eyes were steady on hers, patient, waiting for her response. And Evelyn realized with a clarity that stole her breath that she'd been wrong about everything. This wasn't like being sold to Samuel Thornton. This wasn't captivity in the same sense at all. Talon wasn't trying to own her. He was trying to court her, in the only way he knew how. He'd brought her here not as a slave, but as a potential wife, as someone he'd chosen because he saw value in her that went beyond utility. He was offering her something no one had ever offered before, the choice to be wanted. "Thank you," she whispered, and though he probably didn't understand the words, he seemed to understand the acceptance in them. He nodded once, then turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing there with the turquoise stone clutched in her fist and her heart doing strange, unfamiliar things in her chest. That night, Nalin found her sitting outside the lodge watching the stars. "Talon gives you gift," the old woman observed. "Yes. This is good. Means he claims you. Means other women cannot harm you." Nalin settled down beside her with a grunt. "You accept gift. This means you accept claim." "I know." Evelyn opened her hand, looking at the turquoise stone gleaming in the moonlight. "What happens now?" "Now you learn. You learn our language, our ways. You learn to be Apache." Nalin's voice softened slightly. "You learn to be wife, if that is what you choose. Do I have a choice?" "Always choice. Bad choice, maybe. Choose to refuse Talon, you become slave or worse, but still choice." Nalin looked at her with those wise, ancient eyes. "In your old life, you have choice?" Evelyn thought about Malcolm Hart selling her to pay his debts, about Samuel Thornton examining her teeth like she was a horse at auction. No. No choices at all. Then maybe this is better. Hard life, yes. Dangerous, yes. But your life, your choice. Nalin stood, preparing to return to the lodge. "You think about this. Tomorrow, I teach you to speak our words. Then you can talk to Talon, tell him what you choose." Over the following weeks, Evelyn threw herself into learning with the same desperate determination she'd applied to survival on the wagon train. Nalin proved to be a patient but demanding teacher, drilling Evelyn in Apache words and phrases until she could construct simple sentences. The language was difficult, full of sounds Evelyn had never made before. but she persisted. She learned that Talon's name meant claw of the eagle. She learned that Nalin was his mother's mother, and that his mother had died giving birth to his younger sister, the sister whose death had left him marked with grief. She learned the words for water, fire, food, home. She learned how to prepare meals the Apache way, how to tan hides, how to make the flatbread they ate with every meal. And slowly, carefully, she learned about Talon himself. He was 24 years old, young to have the kind of authority he commanded among the raiding parties. But he'd proven himself in battle repeatedly, had led successful raids against the white settlers who kept pushing into Apache territory. He was respected, even feared, by the other warriors. But with his family, Nalin said, he was gentle, patient, kind in ways that Apache men weren't expected to be. His sister's death changed him, Nalin explained one evening as they worked side by side, stitching a hide. Before, he was like other young men, proud, quick to anger, eager to prove strength. But watching her die slowly, unable to help her, it taught him that strength is not enough. Sometimes all you can do is witness suffering. Sometimes all you can offer is presence. Is that why he brought me here? Because he saw I was suffering? Maybe. Or maybe he saw you a survivor, like him. Maybe he saw that you understand grief. Nalin's needle moved steadily through the hide. You have lost much, yes? Everything. My mother when I was young, my childhood. Any hope of a normal life. Evelyn paused, then added softly, I've never been loved. Not really. My father saw me as a burden. The man he tried to sell me to saw me as property. I've never been wanted for myself. Talon wants you, Nalin said simply. Sees you, chooses you. What you do with that is your choice. That night, as Evelyn lay in the darkness of the lodge, she thought about choices and chances and the strange paths life could take. 2 months ago, she'd been scrubbing her father's floors, waiting to be sold to Samuel Thornton. Now she was sleeping in an Apache lodge, learning to speak a language that had no written form, being courted by a warrior who'd spared her life twice and given her a turquoise stone. The life she'd imagined for herself, if she dared imagine anything at all, had never looked like this. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things in life were the ones you couldn't imagine, couldn't plan for, couldn't control. Maybe you just had to trust. The next day, Talon sought her out while she was working with Nalin, preparing hides. He approached slowly, and Evelyn saw him speak quietly with his grandmother before the old woman nodded and walked away, leaving them alone. Evelyn's heart hammered as Talon sat down across from her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and Evelyn was struck again by the intensity in his dark eyes. Not aggression, but a kind of focused attention that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. You learned speak Apache, he said in his heavily accented English. Good. Your grandmother is a good teacher, Evelyn replied, then haltingly added in Apache, I am learning. His face lit up with a smile that transformed his features, and Evelyn's breath caught. When he smiled, he looked younger, less fierce, and heartbreakingly hopeful. You learn fast, he said, switching to Apache now that he knew she could understand at least some of it. Like you hungry for words. I am hungry, Evelyn agreed, sticking to Apache despite how difficult it was. Hungry to understand. Hungry to know why you brought me here. Talon was quiet for a moment, clearly considering his words carefully. When I saw you first time, he began slowly, at Wagon Train, I saw you protect others, saw you not think of self, saw courage. He paused, searching for words. My sister, before she died, she said to me, find someone who sees world like you see it. Find someone who chooses others over self. I think she saw you, sent you to me. The raw honesty in his words made Evelyn's throat tighten. I'm not special. I'm not brave. I was just doing what needed to be done. That is bravery, Talon said simply. Doing what needed, even when afraid. He reached across the space between them and gently touched the turquoise stone that Evelyn now wore on a leather cord around her neck. You accept gift. You accept me? It was a question, not a demand. He was asking, not telling, giving her the choice that no man had ever given her before. Evelyn thought about running away from Malcolm Hart's cabin, about joining the wagon train with nothing but hope and $40. She thought about choosing to throw herself over Sarah and her baby, about choosing to take Talon's hand when he'd offered it. Every significant moment in her new life had been defined by choices, sometimes terrifying choices, sometimes desperate ones, but always hers to make. And now she stood at another crossroads. She could refuse Talon, could try to escape back to the white settlements, could attempt to find her way back to some version of the life she'd been trying to build on the wagon train. Or she could choose this strange, impossible situation where a warrior who barely knew her had decided she was worth saving, worth courting, worth choosing. "I accept," she said in Apache, then repeated it in English to make sure he understood. "I accept you." The joy that flooded Talon's face was so pure, so unguarded, that Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, some hard protective shell she'd been carrying around her heart for her entire life. He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and strong, and she didn't pull away. "I teach you be Apache," he said. "You teach me understand white ways. Together, we learn." "Together," Evelyn agreed, and the word felt like a promise. Over the following weeks, their relationship unfolded slowly, carefully, like a flower opening petal by petal. Talon brought her gifts, a beautiful feather from a red-tailed hawk, a comb carved from bone, a soft deerskin for making new clothes. In return, Evelyn tried to teach him more English, tried to help him understand the world she'd come from. They sat together in the evenings while she worked, and he would tell her stories about Apache history, about the battles against the Mexican soldiers and now the American settlers, about the sacred places in the mountains and the proper ways to honor the spirits of animals they hunted. In turn, she told him about books she'd read, about the wagon train and the people she'd met, about her dreams of Oregon and fresh starts. "You still want Oregon?" he asked one evening. Evelyn considered the question. Did she? Oregon had represented escape, possibility, transformation. But she was already transformed. She'd already escaped. And the possibilities she'd found here in this hidden Apache camp were stranger and more profound than anything she'd imagined. "I wanted what Oregon represented," she said carefully. "A place where I could choose my own life, be my own person. But I'm finding that here. Even though you are captive? Am I?" Evelyn met his eyes. "I stay by choice now. I could try to run, but I don't want to. That's not captivity. That's choosing." Something in Talon's expression shifted, became almost vulnerable. "You choose me?" "I'm choosing to see where this leads," Evelyn said honestly. "I'm choosing to trust you. That's more than I've ever given anyone." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses from war and work. "I choose you," he said. "From first moment, I choose you. We'll keep choosing you every day." The words broke something open inside Evelyn, that last, stubborn piece of her heart that had refused to believe anyone could want her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and Talon wiped them away with his thumb, his expression full of concern. "Why crying?" he asked. "I say wrong thing?" "No," Evelyn managed to say through her tears. "You said exactly the right thing. It's just, I've never—" She struggled to find words in either language that could capture what she was feeling. Finally, she switched to English, knowing he wouldn't fully understand but needing to say it anyway. "I have never known love. I have never been chosen. I have never been anything but a burden to be managed or property to be sold. And you see me. You want me. You choose me. I don't know how to hold something that precious without being terrified I'll break it." Talon didn't understand all the words, but he seemed to understand the feeling behind them. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and let her cry against his chest while he murmured soft words in Apache, words she couldn't quite translate but understood in her bones meant comfort, safety, acceptance. When she finally calmed, he pulled back enough to look at her face. "I teach you," he said in English. "Teach you love is not breaking. Love is strong, like stone." He touched the turquoise pendant at her throat. "Like this. Hard, but beautiful. Lasting. Teach me." Evelyn whispered. Please, teach me how to accept this, how to believe I deserve it. You deserve, Talon said fiercely. You deserve everything. I give you all I have. And in that moment, sitting in an Apache camp hundreds of miles from anything she'd ever known, Evelyn finally let herself believe him. She finally let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found what she'd been searching for without even knowing she was searching. She'd found someone who saw her, who chose her, who wanted to give her everything he had. She'd found, against all odds and reason, the possibility of love. The seasons turned, and with them, Evelyn transformed. Summer burned itself out across the Apache territories, giving way to the cooler winds of autumn. Her skin, once pale from years spent inside her father's cabin, darkened to bronze under the relentless sun. Her hands, which had been soft despite the hard labor of her old life, became truly calloused, the hands of someone who worked with leather and stone, who could start a fire in minutes, who could track game and read the sky for coming weather. She wore Apache clothing now, a deerskin dress that Nalin had helped her make, decorated with small shells and beadwork that had taken weeks to complete. Her dark hair, once pinned severely back, now hung in 2 long braids wrapped with strips of red cloth. When she caught her reflection in the stream, she barely recognized herself. The frightened woman who'd scrubbed floors in Kansas was gone, replaced by someone stronger, fiercer, more alive. Her Apache improved rapidly until she could converse fluidly with the other women and understand most of what was said around the camp. She learned the names of plants that could heal and those that could kill, learned to read tracks in the dust and identify birds by their calls. She learned the stories of Talon's people, their creation myths, their history of resistance against the Spanish, and then the Mexicans, and now the Americans. She learned that they called themselves Nde, the people, and that Apache was a name given to them by outsiders, a Zuni word meaning enemy. And she learned Talon, learned the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he moved with unconscious grace even when performing the most mundane tasks. Learned that he sang sometimes when he thought no one was listening, his voice low and melodic. Learned that he was patient with children, firm but kind with the younger warriors who looked to him for leadership, and surprisingly gentle with injured animals. He courted her properly according to Apache customs, bringing gifts and spending time with her under Nalin's watchful eye. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, building a bridge between their vastly different worlds with words and touch and growing trust. He taught her to ride the way Apache rode, bareback, becoming one with the horse, and she taught him to read simple English words, scratching letters in the dirt with a stick. "Why this important?" he asked one day, studying the words she'd written. "Words on ground. They wash away with rain." "But they live in your mind," Evelyn explained. "They let you carry ideas across distance and time. Someone can write something down, and years later, someone else can read it and know what they thought." "Like stories elders tell?" "Exactly like that. But stories can change as they're told and retold. Written words stay the same." Talon considered this, his brow furrowed. "My people, we trust memory. Trust what passes from mouth to mouth. Your people trust paper that can burn?" "Both have value," Evelyn said diplomatically, though she was beginning to understand his point. She'd seen the way Apache elders could recite hundreds of years of history, without hesitation, the way knowledge was woven into songs and stories that were impossible to forget. There was strength in that, even if it lacked the permanence of writing. 3 months into her time with the Nde, Nalin approached Evelyn with a serious expression. "Talon wishes to marry you," the old woman said without preamble. "According to our ways. Are you ready?" Evelyn's heart jumped into her throat. What does that mean? The marriage ceremony?" "You stand before the people. Talon gives you blanket, marriage blanket that I make for him when he was young man. You accept or refuse. If accept, you share blanket. You're married. Simple." Nalin's weathered face softened slightly. "But once done, not easy to undo. You become his wife in truth. You belong to each other." Belong. The word should have frightened her, should have reminded her of being property, of being sold. But somehow in this context it felt different. Not possession, but partnership. Not ownership, but choosing to tie your fate to another person's. "What if..." Evelyn hesitated, then forced herself to continue. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail at being an Apache wife? You already are Apache wife in all ways but ceremony, Nalin said bluntly. You work hard, you learn fast, you honor our ways. Other women, they stop looking at you with suspicion. They see you are strong, that you belong here. Even Casa? Nalin snorted. Casa still angry, but she sees truth. Talon never looked at her the way he looks at you. She was match for convenience, not heart. You are match of heart that is stronger. Match of heart. The phrase resonated in Evelyn's chest like a bell. Was that what this was? She thought about the way her pulse quickened when Talon entered her field of vision, the way his smile could light up her entire day, the way she found herself looking for excuses to be near him. She thought about the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered, the way he touched her with such careful reverence, like she was something precious. Yes, Evelyn said, the word coming out stronger than she'd expected. Tell him yes. I'm ready. The ceremony was planned for the next new moon, 2 weeks away. Those 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Nalin and the other women helped Evelyn make a new dress for the occasion. This one more elaborate, with intricate beadwork and fringe that took hours to complete. They taught her the rituals she'd need to perform, the words she'd need to say. And they told her with varying degrees of directness what to expect from the wedding night. Evelyn listened to it all with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. She was 23 years old and had never been touched by a man with anything resembling tenderness. The clinical explanations the women provided were helpful, but they couldn't quite dispel the anxiety that coiled in her stomach when she thought about the reality of becoming Talon's wife in every sense. The night before the ceremony, Evelyn lay awake in Nalin's lodge, staring up at the smoke hole and the stars beyond. Tomorrow, she would pledge herself to Talon according to Apache law. She would become part of the Nde in truth, would take her place as a warrior's wife. Everything would change. But hadn't everything already changed? She'd run from Malcolm Hart's cabin and never looked back. She'd joined a wagon train full of strangers and found friendship. She'd been captured by Apache raiders and discovered belonging. Every transformation in her life had required a leap of faith, a willingness to trust in something she couldn't quite see yet. This was just another leap, maybe the biggest one. But she was ready. The ceremony took place at sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the whole world on fire. The entire camp gathered in a circle, and Evelyn stood in the center, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wore her new dress, her hair woven with feathers and small beads that caught the fading light. Talon entered the circle from the opposite side, and Evelyn's breath caught. He wore his finest clothing, buckskin painted with symbols she'd learned represented protection and strength, his long black hair loose around his shoulders, his face painted with red ochre. He looked like something out of a story, fierce and beautiful, and when his eyes found hers across the circle, the intensity in them made her knees weak. He crossed to her slowly, carrying a blanket that Nalin had woven years ago in anticipation of this day. It was beautiful. Wool dyed in rich earth tones with geometric patterns that told the story of Talon's lineage. He stopped in front of her, and the camp fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried clear and strong to every listener. He spoke in Apache, the words formal and ritualistic, and Evelyn understood them all. I, Talon, son of Running Deer, grandson of many waters, choose this woman to be my wife. I offer her my protection, my provision, my partnership. I offer her my blanket, which represents my home, my heart, my life. If she accepts, we are bound. If she refuses, I honor her choice and release her without shame. Then he held out the blanket to her, and the entire camp held its breath. Evelyn looked at the blanket, then at Talon's face. She saw hope there, but also acceptance. If she refused, he would let her go. She could walk away from this, from him, from the life she was building here. She still had that choice, but she didn't want to walk away. For the first time in her life, she wanted to run towards something instead of away from it. I, Evelyn Hart, she said in Apache, her voice surprisingly steady, accept Talon as my husband. I accept his protection, his provision, his partnership. I accept his blanket, which represents his home, his heart, his life. I give him mine in return, my strength, my loyalty, my love. We are bound. Talon's face transformed with joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. He stepped forward and wrapped the blanket around both of them, pulling her close so they stood together under its warmth. The camp erupted in celebration, ululations from the women, shouts from the men, children running and laughing, but Evelyn barely heard it. She was focused entirely on Talon, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the way his arms felt around her, strong and safe and right. "My wife," he whispered in Apache, his forehead pressed to hers. "My husband," she whispered back, and felt something slot into place in her chest, some piece of herself she hadn't even known was missing. The celebration lasted long into the night, with feasting and dancing and stories. Evelyn and Talon sat together at the center of it all, sharing food from the same bowl, drinking from the same cup, their hands constantly finding each other under the cover of the blanket. Every time their eyes met, Evelyn felt that same jolt of recognition, of rightness, of home. When the fires finally burned low and people began drifting to their lodges, Talon stood and offered Evelyn his hand. She took it, letting him lead her to the lodge he'd prepared for them, their lodge now, their home. Inside it was warm and dim, lit by a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the hide walls. Buffalo robes had been arranged as a bed, and there were small touches that spoke of thought and care, a bundle of sage for sweetness, a water gourd within reach, her few possessions arranged neatly beside his. They stood facing each other in the firelight, suddenly shy despite everything that had passed between them. Talon reached out slowly and touched her face with his fingertips, tracing the line of her cheekbone, her jaw. "You are so beautiful," he said softly, "like sunrise, like water in desert, like everything I did not know I was searching for." Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't understand how this happened, how I went from being worth $300 to a man who saw me as livestock, to being chosen by someone who sees me as precious." "You were always precious," Talon said fiercely. "That man was fool. Your father was fool. Anyone who did not see your value was blind." He cupped her face in both hands. "I see you, Evelyn. All of you. Your strength, your kindness, your fierce heart, your fear, your hurt, your hunger to be loved. I see all of it, and I choose all of it." The tears came then, unstoppable, and Talon held her while she cried, for the girl she'd been, for the love she'd never known, for the joy she'd never thought she'd feel. He murmured soft words in Apache and English both, a mixture of languages that somehow made perfect sense, that somehow captured everything words alone couldn't say. When the tears finally subsided, Evelyn pulled back and looked up at him. "I'm afraid," she admitted. I don't know how to—" "I know," he said gently. "We learn together. Go slow. Stop if you want. This is not like white marriage where woman must obey. This is partnership. You have voice. Always." The care in his words, the patience, the respect, it undid her completely. She reached up and pulled him down into a kiss, trying to pour into it everything she couldn't quite articulate. "Thank you. I trust you. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." Talon responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his hands gentle as they explored, as they slowly unlaced her dress, as they discovered her. And when they finally came together, it was nothing like the clinical descriptions the women had provided or the fearful imaginings Evelyn had harbored. It was transcendent, overwhelming, a joining that went beyond physical to something almost spiritual. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the buffalo robes, Evelyn's head on Talon's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. "I love you," she said in English, then repeated it in Apache. "I didn't think I knew what that meant, but I do now. It means choosing someone every day. It means trusting them with your hurt as well as your joy. It means being seen and choosing to see in return." Talon's arms tightened around her. "I love you," he said. "From first moment, I loved you. I will love you until last moment, and after, my spirit will love your spirit." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and the marriage blanket, and Evelyn's dreams were peaceful for the first time she could remember. The months that followed were the happiest of Evelyn's life. She settled into her role as Talon's wife, earning respect from the other women through her hard work and growing skills. She learned to treat injuries and illnesses using the plants Nellen taught her about. She became proficient at tanning hides and making clothing that could withstand the harsh conditions of Apache life. She even learned to shoot a bow with reasonable accuracy, though she would never match the warrior's skill. And she loved Talon more each day, a love that grew deeper and more complex as she learned all his facets. His playfulness when they were alone, his fierce protectiveness of his people, his moments of vulnerability when he mourned his sister or worried about the encroaching white soldiers. They talked about everything, sharing dreams and fears, learning each other's languages and hearts in equal measure. But the outside world would not let them exist in their bubble of happiness forever. It was late autumn, the air turning sharp with the promise of winter, when the soldiers came. They arrived at dawn with rifles and cannons, a company of U.S. cavalry determined to bring back the white captives they'd heard were being held by Apache raiders. Captain William Thorne had survived the raid that took Evelyn and had reported her capture to the authorities. Now they'd come to rescue her. The soldiers surrounded the camp, their weapons trained on the warriors who scrambled to mount a defense. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and the officer in command, a hard-faced colonel named Prescott, held a white flag calling for parley. "We know you have white captives," Prescott shouted in stilted Apache. "Send them out, and we'll leave peacefully. Resist, and we'll take them by force." Evelyn stood with the other women, her heart pounding, as the Apache leadership debated what to do. Talon argued fiercely for resistance, but the elders were pragmatic. They couldn't win this fight, not without heavy casualties. Better to let the white woman go and live to fight another day. "No," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "I won't go." Every eye in the camp turned to her. Talon crossed to her side immediately, his hand going to the knife at his belt. "Evelyn," Nellen said urgently, "if you refuse, they will attack. People will die." "Then I'll tell them I'm not a captive, that I'm here by choice, that I'm married to Talon according to Apache law." Evelyn's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "They can't force me to leave if I don't want to." "They are soldiers," one of the elders said grimly. "They do not care about Apache law. They do not care about your choice. They see white woman among savages and think they rescue you, even if you do not want rescue." The truth of those words settled over Evelyn like a shroud. The soldiers wouldn't listen to her. They'd made up their minds about what this situation was before they even arrived. To them, she was a victim who needed saving, not a woman who'd chosen her own path. "I'll go talk to them," she said. "Make them understand." "No," Talon said sharply. "Too dangerous. They might not let you return. But if I don't go, people will die. Your people. Our people." Evelyn took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Trust me. I'll make them understand. And I'll come back to you. I promise." "Evelyn, do you trust me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Finally, painfully, Talon nodded. "I trust you, but I do not trust them." "Then watch," Evelyn said. "If they try to take me by force, you'll know, and you can fight. But let me try this first." She turned and walked toward the line of soldiers before anyone could stop her, before her courage could fail. As she approached, she saw their faces registering shock. She looked nothing like what they'd expected. Not a traumatized captive in torn clothes, but a woman in Apache dress, walking with confidence, her skin darkened by sun and her hair in braids. "Colonel Prescott," she called out in English. "I am Evelyn Hart. I believe you're here looking for me." The colonel urged his horse forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Miss Hart, we received reports that you were taken by Apache raiders nearly 6 months ago. Are you well? Have you been harmed?" "I'm perfectly well, and I haven't been harmed," Evelyn said clearly. "I'm here by choice. I'm married to one of the warriors according to Apache law. I'm not a captive, and I don't need rescuing." Prescott's expression hardened. "Miss Hart, I understand that captivity can affect a person's mind, that you may feel loyalty toward your captors as a survival mechanism. But you're an American citizen, and it's my duty to return you to civilization." "Civilization?" Evelyn couldn't keep the anger from her voice. "I left your civilization, Colonel. I ran away from a father who sold me like livestock to pay his debts. I ran away from a man who saw me as property. I found more civilization, more humanity, more love among the Nde than I ever found among white people. The Nde? The Apache. That's what they call themselves. And before you tell me they're savages, let me remind you that it was white men who beat me, who sold me, who treated me as less than human. The Apache gave me choice. They gave me respect. They gave me love. Prescott's mouth thinned. Be that as it may, I have my orders. You're to be returned to Fort Laramie, where we'll determine your mental state and contact any family who might be searching for you. I have no family, and my mental state is perfectly sound. I'm choosing to stay here with my husband. Apache marriage isn't recognized under U.S. law. In the eyes of the government, you're an unmarried white woman living among hostile Indians. That makes you a victim, Miss Hart, whether you see it that way or not. The frustration boiled over in Evelyn's chest. So my choice doesn't matter? My voice doesn't matter? You're going to take me by force, dress it up as rescue, and feel righteous about it? If necessary, yes. Prescott's voice was implacable. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings. After that, we're taking you back to the fort, peacefully or otherwise. He wheeled his horse and returned to his men, leaving Evelyn standing alone between two worlds, the world she'd chosen and the world that refused to let her go. She walked back to the Apache camp with leaden steps. Talon met her halfway, his face carved from stone. They will take you, he said. It wasn't a question. They'll try. They've given me an hour to gather my belongings. Evelyn's voice broke. They won't listen. They've decided I'm a victim, and nothing I say will change their minds. Then we fight. No, they'll slaughter everyone. They have cannons, Talon. They have enough men and weapons to destroy this whole camp. Then what? His hands gripped her shoulders. I let them take you? Watch them steal my wife? Lose you like I lost my sister? I don't know, Evelyn admitted, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to do. I don't want to leave you, but I don't want your people to die because of me. They stood there holding each other while the camp erupted in urgent debate around them. Some warriors wanted to fight regardless of the cost. Others argued for retreat, for moving the camp while they still could. The elders counseled patience, strategy, waiting for a better opportunity. In the end, it was Nalin who provided the answer. You go with them, the old woman said, her voice heavy but certain. You go, you play their game. You let them think they saved you. And then, when time is right, you come back to us. But how? They'll watch me. They'll probably send me back east, far from here. Apache know how to travel unseen. Apache know how to find what we seek. Nalin gripped Evelyn's hands. You are Nde now. You are one of us. We do not abandon our people. When it is safe, Talon will come for you, and you will come home. Evelyn looked at Talon, seeing the same desperate hope in his eyes that she felt in her chest. It was a plan, at least. A possibility. Better than watching people die or losing each other permanently. Promise me, she said to him. Promise you'll come for me, no matter how long it takes. I promise, Talon said fiercely. I will find you. I will bring you home. This is not ending. This is just waiting. They spent the last hour together in their lodge, holding each other, memorizing every detail. Evelyn removed the turquoise pendant from around her neck and tried to give it back to Talon. Keep it, he said, closing her fingers around it. Reminds you of promise. Reminds you that you are my wife, no matter what white soldiers say. Reminds you that I am coming. I'll wear it under my dress, Evelyn said. Hide it from them. Keep it close to my heart. When the hour was up, she walked out to meet the soldiers, carrying nothing but a small bundle of her old clothes that she'd kept. Talon walked beside her to the edge of the camp, and when they reached the line, he pulled her into a fierce kiss that spoke of love and loss and desperate promise. I will find you, he whispered against her lips. I know, she whispered back. I'll be waiting. Then she turned and walked toward the soldiers, toward the horses they'd brought for her, toward the world she'd fought so hard to escape. Behind her, she could feel Talon's eyes on her back, and she could feel the turquoise stone pressing against her heart. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. She'd found love, found home, found herself. and now it was being taken away by men who thought they knew better than she did what was good for her. But Nalin was right. She was in Day now. She was Apache. And Apache didn't give up. They adapted. They survived. They fought in ways the white soldiers couldn't predict or understand. So Evelyn would go to Fort Laramie. She would play whatever role they needed her to play, and she would wait for Talon to come for her, because he would come. She knew it with a certainty that went bone deep. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just a new chapter, one that would test everything they'd built, everything they'd promised each other. As the cavalry escorted her away from the camp, away from Talon, away from the life she'd chosen, Evelyn touched the turquoise pendant hidden beneath her dress and made a vow. She would survive this. She would endure whatever came next. And when Talon came for her, because he would come, she would be ready. They'd promised each other everything, and Evelyn Hart kept her promises. Fort Laramie rose from the plains like a monument to everything Evelyn had learned to despise about the world she'd left behind. The wooden stockade walls, the rigid rows of buildings, the American flag snapping in the wind, all of it represented order imposed by force, civilization built on the destruction of other ways of life. As the cavalry escort rode through the gates, Evelyn felt the weight of those walls closing around her like a prison. The fort's commander, a graying major named Hendricks, received her in his office with the sort of patronizing kindness that made Evelyn's teeth ache. He sat her down in a stiff-backed chair, offered her tea she didn't want, and regarded her with the expression of someone looking at a broken thing that needed fixing. "Miss Hart," he began, his voice dripping with false warmth, "I cannot imagine what you've endured these past months. The trauma of captivity, living among savages, the fear you must have felt every day. But you're safe now. We'll take good care of you." Evelyn bit back the sharp response that rose to her lips and instead said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, Major, but I wasn't traumatized. I was treated well." Hendrick's expression shifted to something that looked like pity. "That's a common response among captives, Miss Hart. It's called accommodation, the mind's way of protecting itself from unbearable circumstances. You convinced yourself that your captors were treating you well because believing otherwise would have been too painful. That's not... We have a doctor here, Dr. Walcott, who has extensive experience with cases like yours. He'll examine you, ensure you weren't physically harmed, and help assess the extent of the psychological damage." The casual dismissal of her own understanding of her experience made fury burn hot in Evelyn's chest, but she forced it down. Getting angry would only confirm their belief that she was unstable. Instead, she needed to be strategic, to play the role they expected while she figured out how to get back to Talon. "Of course," she said, folding her hands in her lap. "Whatever you think is best." Over the following days, Evelyn was poked and prodded and questioned until she wanted to scream. Dr. Walcott examined her with clinical detachment, noting in his records that she showed no signs of physical abuse but displayed concerning symptoms of captivity sickness, attachment to her captors, reluctance to acknowledge her ordeal, insistence on defending savage practices. A chaplain visited, clucking his tongue over her moral degradation and offering lengthy prayers for her redemption. Well-meaning officers' wives stopped by with offers of proper clothing and instruction in how to be civilized again. Through it all, Evelyn played her part. She accepted the dresses they gave her, though they felt like costumes after months in deerskin. She sat through the chaplain's prayers with her head bowed. She answered the doctor's questions carefully, learning which responses made him frown and which made him nod with satisfaction. She was learning their language the same way she'd learned Apache, figuring out what they wanted to hear, what would make them trust her, what would eventually give her the freedom to escape. At night, alone in the small room they'd given her in the officers' quarters, she would pull out the turquoise pendant and hold it until the stone grew warm in her palm. She'd whisper to Talon in Apache, telling him about her day, promising him she was surviving, begging him to find her soon. The pendant was her anchor, her reminder that this was temporary, that she had a home to return to. 3 weeks into her stay at Fort Laramie, a letter arrived that changed everything. Major Hendricks summoned her to his office, his expression grave. "Miss Hart, we've received correspondence from a Mr. Samuel Thornton of Kansas. He claims he had an agreement with your father regarding matrimony." Hendricks looked uncomfortable. He's demanding that you be returned to him to fulfill that agreement. Evelyn's blood ran cold. No, absolutely not. I ran away from that arrangement. My father had no right to make it, and I have no intention of honoring it. According to Mr. Thornton, your father receives substantial payment. Legally, that constitutes a contract. A contract to sell a human being? That's not legal. That's slavery. It's more complicated than that, Miss Hart. Your father had legal guardianship over you as an unmarried woman. He had the right to arrange your marriage. I'm not unmarried, Evelyn said desperately. I told you, I'm married to Talon according to Apache law. Apache law isn't recognized by the United States government. In the eyes of the law, you're unmarried, and your father's contract with Mr. Thornton may still be valid. Hendricks sighed. I've written to the territorial governor for guidance on how to proceed. In the meantime, you're to remain here at the fort. Remain here. A polite way of saying she was a prisoner. Evelyn returned to her room, feeling the walls close in even tighter. She'd escaped Samuel Thornton once, and now he was reaching across hundreds of miles to claim her like a piece of lost property. The injustice of it burned like acid in her throat. That night, she made a decision. She couldn't wait for Talon to find her. She had to act. Over the next week, Evelyn studied the fort's routines with the same careful attention she'd once applied to learning Apache customs. She noted when the guards changed shifts, when the gates were opened for supply wagons, when people were most distracted. She watched the laundresses who came in from a nearby settlement, how they moved freely between the fort and the outside world, how little attention the soldiers paid them. She befriended one of the laundresses, a tired-looking woman named Martha, who had 3 children and a husband who drank too much. Evelyn helped her with the washing, shared stories that made Martha laugh, and slowly earned her trust. When she finally asked Martha if she could borrow a set of her work clothes, Martha agreed without much question. "You're not planning to do something foolish, are you?" Martha asked as she handed over a rough cotton dress and apron. "I'm planning to do something necessary," Evelyn replied. "Do you believe people have the right to choose their own lives?" Martha's expression turned sad. "I believe most people don't get that choice, but if you're one of the lucky ones who can take it, then you should." "Thank you," Evelyn said, and meant it for more than just the clothes. The escape was almost absurdly simple. The next morning, Evelyn dressed in Martha's work clothes, bundled her hair under a bonnet, and walked out with the laundresses when they left for the day. The guards at the gate barely glanced at her. Why would they? They were looking for Apache raiders, not a woman in laundryman's dress carrying a basket of dirty linens. Once outside the fort, Evelyn kept walking with the other women until they reached the settlement, then quietly broke away and headed east. Not west toward the Apache territories, that would be too obvious, and the soldiers would look for her there first. Instead, she'd circle around, travel at night, use every skill Talon and Nalen had taught her about moving unseen across the land. She had no supplies except the turquoise pendant, the clothes on her back, and a small knife she'd stolen from the fort's kitchen. It wasn't much, but she'd left Malcolm Hart's cabin with less than this and survived. She'd joined a wagon train with nothing but hope and determination and made it through Apache raids and the long trail west. She would survive this too. For 3 days, Evelyn traveled through the rough country surrounding Fort Laramie, moving at night and hiding during the day. She foraged for food the way Nalene had taught her, finding edible roots and berries, catching a rabbit in a snare she fashioned from strips of her apron. She drank from streams and slept in hidden places, always listening for pursuit, always ready to run. On the 4th day, as she crouched behind a rock outcropping watching a patrol of soldiers pass below, she heard it. A sound like nothing else in the world. The call of a red-tailed hawk, but with a slight variation that she'd heard Talon use as a signal to other warriors. She looked up and saw him. Talon sat on his paint horse at the top of a rise, silhouetted against the sky like something out of a dream. For a moment, Evelyn thought exhaustion and hunger had made her hallucinate. But then he raised his hand in the Apache greeting, and she knew he was real. She scrambled up the slope toward him, her legs shaking, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. When she reached him, he slid down from his horse and caught her as her legs finally gave out. They held each other without words, just breathing, just being together, just reassuring themselves that this was real. "I found you," Talon finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I promised I would find you. How? Evelyn pulled back enough to see his face. How did you know where to look? Apache have ways. We watch Fort, we listen to traders, we follow signs. He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the shadows under her eyes. You are hurt? They hurt you? No, just tired. Just so tired of fighting. The exhaustion crashed over her then, weeks of being on guard, of playing a role, of pretending to be something she wasn't. Take me home, Talon, please. Take me home. Always, he promised. But first, we must ride far and fast. They will look for you. They will not stop looking. I know, let them look. Evelyn gripped his arms. I'm not going back, not to the fort, not to Samuel Thornton, not to any life that isn't the one I choose. If they find us, if they try to take me again, they will not take you. Talon's voice was fierce, absolute. I will die before I let them take you again. No, no dying. We've done enough surviving separately. Now we survive together. He helped her onto his horse, and they rode south and west, away from Fort Laramie, away from the searching soldiers, toward the hidden canyons where the Nde made their camps. They rode for hours, Talon pushing the horse hard, Evelyn clinging to his back and feeling safety for the first time in weeks. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that reminded Evelyn of her wedding ceremony, Talon finally slowed the horse. They were in rough country now, all mesas and hidden valleys, the kind of terrain where the Apache could disappear completely. We stop soon, Talon said. Camp has moved, but I know where. We reach them by tomorrow night. They made camp in a sheltered canyon, Talon building a small fire and catching fish from a stream, while Evelyn sat and tried to process that she was actually free, actually safe, actually going home. When he brought her the cooked fish, she ate ravenously, and he watched her with concern. Fort did not feed you enough? They fed me plenty, but it wasn't food I was hungry for. Evelyn set down the fish and took his hand. I was hungry for this, for you, for being seen as myself instead of as a victim or a patient or a problem to be solved. Talon pulled her close, and she burrowed into his embrace. At Fort, they try to tell you that you were broken? That I hurt you? They tried. They had a whole story worked out. Poor white woman traumatized by savage captors, suffering from captivity sickness, unable to recognize her own victimhood. Evelyn's voice turned bitter. They wouldn't listen when I told them I chose you. They just decided I was too damaged to know my own mind. White people, Talon said with a mixture of anger and resignation, they think they know what is best for everyone. They cannot understand that other ways of living might be good, might be chosen. Not all white people. Clara and the Morrisons, they understood about choosing your own path. That's why they were heading west in the first place. Evelyn looked up at him. But you're right. Most of them can't imagine that someone would choose Apache life over civilization. They think their way is the only way. What will you do if they come again? If they find us and try to take you back? Evelyn thought about that. Really thought about it. The soldiers wouldn't stop looking for her. Samuel Thornton wouldn't give up his claim easily. She would always be a white woman living among the Apache, always vulnerable to being rescued by people who refused to accept her choice. I'll fight, she said finally. Not with weapons, necessarily. But I'll fight with words, with stubbornness, with every bit of determination I have. And if that's not enough, she touched the knife at her belt. I'll do what I have to do. I won't go back. Talon's eyes were dark with understanding and sorrow. Apache are being pushed farther into mountains, farther from good hunting grounds. White soldiers come more every year. Future is uncertain. I know, but I'd rather have an uncertain future with you than a certain one without you. Even if it means running, hiding, always looking over shoulder. I've been running since I left my father's cabin. I've been looking over my shoulder my whole life. Evelyn cupped his face in her hands. But when I'm with you, I'm not running from something. I'm running toward something. That makes all the difference. They sat together by the fire as the stars came out, talking about the future in quiet voices. Talon told her that the band was planning to move deeper into the mountains, to territory the soldiers would have difficulty following. It would be harder living, colder winters, scarcer game, but safer from the encroaching white settlements. Evelyn listened and nodded, accepting that her life would be one of constant adaptation, constant movement, constant vigilance. But she'd made her choice, and she would keep choosing it every day for the rest of her life. The next day, they rode into the Apache camp just as the sun was setting. The reception was jubilant, women ululating in welcome, children running to greet them, warriors clasping Talon's arm in respect and acknowledgement. Nalin met them with tears in her eyes, pulling Evelyn into a fierce embrace. "You came back," the old woman said. "I knew you would. I told them all. She is in day. She will come back." "I am in day," Evelyn agreed. "This is my home. These are my people." That night, there was celebration. Not as grand as the wedding ceremony had been, but joyful nonetheless. Food and dancing and stories. Evelyn sat with Talon beside the central fire, his marriage blanket wrapped around both of them, and felt a peace she'd never known settle into her bones. Clara Morrison's words from what felt like a lifetime ago came back to her. "Out there, you get to decide who you become." And Evelyn had decided. She'd become someone who chose love over safety, who chose belonging over acceptance, who chose to define her own life on her own terms. She'd become someone who could throw herself in front of death to save others, who could endure captivity in a fort as well as she'd endured it in her father's house, who could escape and survive and find her way home. She'd become someone worthy of the love Talon offered so freely. Later, in their lodge, wrapped in each other's arms, Talon asked the question that had been hovering between them since the moment they'd reunited. "What if they come again? What if soldiers find camp and try to take you?" "Then we run," Evelyn said. "Together. We run, or we fight, or we do whatever we have to do. But we do it together." "Together," Talon agreed. He pulled her closer, his lips against her hair. "You know, when you were gone, I thought maybe I dream you. Maybe you were never real. How could someone like you exist, someone so brave, so strong, who chooses me when she could have easier life? I wasn't brave when you first saw me. I was terrified. Bravery is not absence of fear. Bravery is acting despite fear. You did that. You threw yourself in front of death to save people you barely knew. Then you took my hand even though you did not know what would happen. Then you came back to me even though it meant risking everything." He pulled back to look at her face. "You are bravest person I know." Evelyn felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm only brave because you made me believe I was worth saving. Before you, I thought I was nothing, worth $300 at best, a burden at worst. You looked at me and saw someone precious. You taught me to see that in myself. You were always precious. I just helped you see truth." They made love then, slow and tender, relearning each other after weeks apart. And afterward, as Evelyn drifted toward sleep, she heard Talon whisper against her skin words she'd once thought she'd never hear, never deserve. "I love you. I will always love you, in this life and whatever comes after." "I love you too," she whispered back. "You gave me everything. You gave me choice. You gave me home. You gave me love. You gave me myself. You already had yourself. I just saw it." Evelyn smiled in the darkness. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd always had the strength, the courage, the worthiness inside her, just waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe love really could transform a person, could help them become the best version of themselves. Either way, she'd found it. Found him. Found herself. The months that followed were not easy. The band moved deeper into the mountains as Talon had predicted, and life became harder in many ways. Food was scarcer, the winters were brutal, and the constant threat of discovery by soldiers hung over everything like a shadow. Twice, they had to break camp and move in the middle of the night when scouts spotted cavalry patrols. Once, they heard that a reward had been posted for information about Evelyn's whereabouts. Samuel Thornton, it seemed, was determined to reclaim his property. But Evelyn never regretted her choice. Not when the snow piled high and food ran low. Not when she had to help Nalin treat injuries from skirmishes with soldiers. Not when she missed the conveniences of the life she'd left behind. Books and beds and meals she didn't have to forage for. Because she had something more valuable than any of that. She had love. Real love. The kind that saw her completely and chose her anyway. The kind that made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be brave, worthy enough to take up space in the world. And she had belonging. She was part of something larger than herself, a family, a tribe, a people who accepted her not because she was useful, but because she was one of them. The other women taught her the old songs. The children called her auntie. The warriors respected her counsel. She was woven into the fabric of Apache life so thoroughly that she couldn't imagine being ripped from it. One evening in late spring, about 8 months after her escape from Fort Laramie, Evelyn sat with Nalin grinding corn outside their lodge. The old woman had been unusually quiet all day, and finally she spoke. "There are soldiers at the Western Pass," Nalin said softly. "A large group. They are asking traders if they have seen a white woman living with Apache. They offer much money." Evelyn's hand stilled on the grinding stone. "How much time do we have?" 2 days, maybe 3. The scouts will watch them, and we will move if they come closer." Nalin looked at her with those wise, ancient eyes. "You know they will never stop looking. As long as you live, there will be someone trying to rescue you, someone trying to take you from us." "I know. Does this frighten you?" Evelyn thought about that. A year ago, the idea of being hunted for the rest of her life would have terrified her. But she was different now, stronger, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't frighten me. Let them look. Let them offer rewards. They'll never find what they're searching for, because the woman they think they're rescuing doesn't exist anymore. I'm not a victim. I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I choose to be." Nalin smiled, a rare, bright expression that transformed her weathered face. "You are truly Nde now, not just in name, but in heart." That night, Evelyn and Talon climbed to a high point overlooking the camp. They sat together watching the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had witnessed every transformation in Evelyn's journey from Kansas to here. "Do you ever regret it?" Talon asked quietly. "Choosing this life? Choosing me?" "Never," Evelyn said without hesitation. "Do you regret choosing me? A white woman who brings soldiers to your door, who can't fully disappear the way you can?" "Never," he echoed. "You are my heart, my home, my reason for fighting, for surviving, for hoping tomorrow comes." They sat in silence for a while, and then Evelyn spoke words that had been building in her chest for weeks. "I'm pregnant." Talon went very still beside her. "You are certain?" "Yes, about 6 weeks, I think. Nalin confirmed it yesterday." "And you want this child?" Evelyn heard the uncertainty in his voice and understood it. A child would make everything harder, running, hiding, surviving. A child would be one more life depending on them, one more reason to be afraid. But it would also be proof that their love could create something beautiful, something new, something that belonged fully to both worlds and neither. "I want this child," she said firmly. "I want to raise them here, with you, with our people. I want to teach them to be strong and brave and kind. I want to teach them that love is a choice we make every day, and that choosing each other is the most important thing we can do." Talon's hand found hers in the darkness, gripping tight. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "This world we live in, it is dangerous for Apache children. So many die from sickness, from hunger, from soldiers. And a child who is half white, half Apache, they will belong nowhere, will be accepted by neither world." "They'll belong with us," Evelyn said fiercely. "We'll make sure they know they're loved, they're wanted, they're exactly who they're meant to be. We'll teach them both languages, both worlds. We'll teach them that they don't have to choose between their parents' people. They can honor both." "You sound very certain." "I am certain, because I know what it's like to grow up unwanted, unloved, told you're a burden. And I know what it's like to finally be chosen, to finally be loved. Our child will never doubt either of those things. They'll be the most loved, most wanted child in the world." Talon pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Then we will have this child. We will protect them, teach them, love them. And if the world does not accept them, we will make our own world where they are accepted." They stayed on that high point until the stars began to fade and the eastern sky lightened with the promise of dawn. Below them, the camp was beginning to stir. People emerging from lodges, fires being lit, the daily rhythm of survival beginning again. This was her life now. Hard, uncertain, always on the edge of danger, but also full of love, full of purpose, full of the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. As they made their way back down to camp, Talon asked one more question. The child. When they are old enough, if they ask about your old life, what will you tell them? Evelyn thought about Malcolm Hart's cabin, about Samuel Thornton's wet lips, about scrubbing floors and being sold like livestock. She thought about the wagon train and Clara Morrison and the long road west. She thought about being captured and finding freedom in captivity, about choosing love when logic said she should run. I'll tell them the truth, she said. I'll tell them I once cried that I had never known love, and then their father answered by giving me all of his. I'll tell them that love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That is good story, Talon said. True story. The best stories usually are. They walked into camp together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Behind them, the sun rose over the mountains, spilling gold across the hidden canyon where the Inde had made their temporary home. Ahead of them, the future stretched uncertain and challenging and absolutely full of possibility. Evelyn Hart, who was also Evelyn Talon, who was also just Evelyn, wife and soon-to-be mother and survivor and chooser of her own destiny, squared her shoulders and walked toward that future with her head held high. She had never known love until Talon had shown her, and now she knew it so completely, so absolutely, that it filled every corner of her life. That love would sustain her through whatever hardships came. That love would teach her child what it meant to be brave. That love would be her North Star, guiding her home no matter how far she traveled or how lost she became. Once she had been property. Once she had been nothing. Once she had believed she was worth exactly $300 and not a penny more. But Talon had looked at her and seen infinite value. He'd offered her his hand, his home, his heart, and she'd taken them all and given hers in return. That was the whole story, really. Two people from different worlds finding each other in the chaos, choosing each other despite every reason not to, and building a life together that honored both of them. Simple. Impossible. Perfect. As Evelyn helped Nalin prepare breakfast and felt Talon's eyes on her from across the camp and touched the turquoise pendant at her throat that she would never remove, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought them together. Thank you for showing me I was worth saving. Thank you for teaching me how to love. Thank you for giving me a reason to choose life every day, no matter how hard it gets. The morning sun climbed higher and life went on. There would be challenges ahead, soldiers to avoid, winters to survive, a child to raise in a world that might never fully accept them. But Evelyn had faced impossible odds before and won. She would face them again with Talon beside her and love as her armor. She had never known love.